Zdravo svima, dobrodošli u još jednu epizodu Umami šegrt podcasta. Danas imam posebno zadovoljstvo što je sa mnom moja gošća Crystyl Mo. Crystyl Mo je svetska faca na polju gastronomije. Ona je academy chair za čak 2 liste 50 najboljih restorana sveta i 50 najboljih restorana u Aziji. To znači da je ona osoba koja, između ostalog, pričat ćemo o tome u samoj epizodi, i bira ljude koji će glasati za 50 najboljih restorana na svetu. Pričat ćemo o tome kako je došla iz Amerike u Šangaj, kako je u Šangaju postala novinar, food kritik, kako je obilazila i bila zadužena za preko 180.000 restorana u Šangaju i kako je u više navrata odbila poziciju academy chaira, ne znajući šta to sve podrazume, koliko je to velika čast. Tako da ovu epizodu smo snimali u Impact Hubu, nismo je snimali na našoj standardnoj lokaciji. Zahvaljujem se ovog puta njima na saradnji. Želim da se zahvalim mojoj ekipi sa podcast.rs koji su zaduženi za produkciju ovog podcasta. Oni su se u najkraćem mogućem roku u par sati organizovali i napravili setup da možemo da snimimo ovu epizodu. Sam imao zadovoljstvo da budem domaćin Crystyl kada je bila u Beogradu i onda smo u par sati se dogovorili da možemo i da imamo vremena i da želimo oboje da snimimo ovu epizodu, tako da hvala ekipi koja se brzom brzinom organizovala da to možemo i da izvedemo. Izvinjavamo se na bilo kakvim nekakvim tehničkim propustima, estetskim, ukoliko ih primetite. Prosto prioritet je bio da ova epizoda bude snimljena, a ne toliko kako će biti snimljena. Tako da, nadam se da ćete uživati u njoj. Pored toga želim da vas pozovem da, ukoliko već do sada niste, subscribeujte se na YouTube kanal, na audio platforme putem kojih nas pratite, lajkujte, šerujte, komentarišite, pitajte, predlažite goste. Želim da se zahvalim svima onima koji nas podržavaju putem jednokratnih donacija, putem PayPala ili mesečnim donacijama preko sajtova Patreon i Buy Me a Coffee. Hvala puno na tome, vaša podrška puno znači. Za sve one koji žele da nas podrže na taj način, možete pronaći linkove u opisu ove epizode na kojoj god platformi da nas slušate. Svi oni koji nas podržavaju tim putem imaju pristup bonus sadržajima koje snimamo sa svakim gostom u smislu nekakvih zanimljivih dodatnih saveta, recepata, pomoći za kako da nešto uradite sami kod kuće, u zavisnosti od toga iz koje je gost branše, profesije ili teme. Tako da uživat ćete, siguran sam, i u tim bonus sadržajima i hvala što razumete da nam je vaša podrška za produkciju ovog podcasta potrebna. Uživajte u epizodi sa Crystyl Moom kao što sam i ja uživao radići je. So, welcome to our new studio for today.
Thank you.
And welcome to Umami Šegrt podcast. I haven't even told you the name of the podcast. It's Umami Apprentice. The name is Umami Apprentice.
Love it.
And so we are here to talk about the gastronomy, hedonism through the eyes of hedonism, through the perspective and angle of hedonism, and some education as well. So this is something I'm sure you will be very knowledgeable about. So first, let me ask you about your role, okay? And it's actually one of your roles, right?
Yes.
So you are the Academy Chair for the 50 World's Best Restaurant.
Yes, I'm the Academy Chair for the World's 50 Best Restaurants and also for Asia's 50 Best Restaurants.
Are these
two separate?
These are two separate lists.
Okay.
And so some people in Asia just know me as the Asian chair, but actually I also choose the voters for both of these award lists.
Okay, so this is something I didn't know, that there are actually two lists. These are the only two in the world. So
No, we have many lists actually. So we have also the world's 50 best bars and Asia's 50 best bars, which I also am very interested in those. And I also help with those lists because I am a huge cocktail aficionado. And also we have other lists, which I don't participate in because I'm based in Shanghai. We also have Latin America's 50 best, and we also have a brand new list, which we are launching just this year, breaking news, which is called MENA, which is Middle East and North Africa. So we're going to have a new 50 best list.
okay, so this is the practice in which it will be going to separate the list by regions, yeah?
Yes.
Do you think this is something that's important because of the local reviewing scene? And
Yeah, I mean, the reason that the list was first launched, I think 17 or 18 years ago in London, was by these two young guys who were feeling like Michelin and maybe other awards didn't recognize the kind of restaurants that young people thought were some of the best in the world, because Michelin was more focused on a certain type of formal atmosphere and cuisine style, which is not necessarily true anymore, but people kind of had this idea of this kind of formal, maybe fussy kind of dining. And that, as I understand it, that these two people were like, well, let's make a list that represents more the best restaurant we want to go to. And let's just ask all our friends who are experts in foods to say what are their favorite experiences. And so the first lists of those first few years were a real mix of like casual and also El Bulli. So that was like number one, but I heard that there was also like some burger place on the list at the first few years. I haven't actually looked at it, but that's kind of like the urban legend. And so the list has, I think, always strived to represent either regions or chefs or cuisine styles that haven't been represented before in, I mean, Michelin is obviously the best known, but maybe also in other type of award categories that are all about like luxury dining and white tablecloths.
So it's definitely, it was an effort to add to the world of...
Yeah, and I think you've seen that. I mean, many people talk about how they think it's super exciting because they would find a restaurant in Lima which, you know, still doesn't have a guide, and that they would never have found on any other list. Or, you know, you'd like, you know, on Arash is a great example, like in the middle of the countryside of Slovenia, that we would have a 50 best restaurant. And so these areas and these people and these types of ethnic cuisines, which hadn't really been recognized on the world stage before, were being given this platform.
Yes, perfect. So can you explain me more about the details of your role and the system of voting, and maybe we can explain to the viewers and listeners so they can understand it a bit better?
Sure. Well, the way I came to this role is also a kind of serendipitous. I was a food journalist in Asia for about 15 years, and I was nominated by another person in the industry. And I got an email from one of the leaders, top guys in London, asking, would I be willing to be an Academy chair for the world's 50 best restaurants? And at that time, I had barely even heard of it. I was like, I think I've heard about this before. But actually, even now, this is 5 years later, in China, it's not a very well-known list because we only have one restaurant on the list in Worlds and 2 on the Asias. And so within China, it's not a very well-known list. And I was like, no, I'm not interested in another volunteer position. This is an honorary role. There's no pay. We don't work for them. The Academy chairs are all honorary positions. So I was like ignoring these emails, and eventually, like after getting like 3 of them and not responding, the woman who had nominated me called me and she was like, Crystyl, can you please just like email this guy back?
You were playing hard to get.
I mean, I was just like, you know, as a very busy food writer and editor for many, many years, I like constantly getting requests like, will you come judge this? Will you come to, this restaurant and meet this chef? And, will you do this? And I'm like, no. I had a 1-year-old daughter, and my job as a food editor was super busy. Anyways, eventually I wrote them back. We had a conversation. William Drew, who is the head of director of content, I think is his title. He convinced me. He was like, just try it out. We think you'll enjoy this position. And I went home and talked to my husband, and I was like, I'm so busy. I don't have time for another volunteer position. And he was like, oh, it's volunteer? Well, why don't you just try it? Because you won't owe them anything. You can quit at any time. It's not like you'll have to go sue them for your salary or something. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, maybe I'll just try it.
It makes sense, yeah.
As soon as I took the position and they put out this press release, I was immediately contacted by all of these amazing chefs and organizations around the world. And it just happened that 2 weeks later, Massimo Bottura was coming to Shanghai. And he contacted me. I didn't know who he was at the time.
Oh my God.
Because I'd just been really focused on Asia and on a lot of Michelin star chefs in Asia. But I didn't know Europe very well. I was American, so I knew more about the James Beard winners. And I was in Asia, so I knew a lot about the chefs there. Anyways, he contacts me. This is a funny anecdote. I can tell you this, and then we'll go back to how the voting works. So Massimo sends me an email, and he's like, I'm coming to Shanghai, and I'd love to invite you to my dinner. And I was like, oh my God, another chef inviting me to another dinner. In Shanghai, I have 180,000 restaurants to cover. I do not have time to just go meet this random visiting chef, because there's always visiting chefs, there's always dinners, and I have one stomach.
He was a visitor at some place.
He came to this Italian restaurant, and he was, now looking back at it, I'm actually surprised that they got him to come to Shanghai for this, small dinner pop-up. It was like a 2-night, maybe it was just 1 night. Anyways, I was like, I'm sorry, I'm busy that night. Sorry, can't make it. And the reason I had said I'm busy is because I was supposed to have a pajama party at my friend's house. So instead of going to Massimo Bottura's little pop-up dinner, I was going to go to my friend's house and wear pajamas. Fortunately, 2 days later, 2 days before the dinner, she canceled. And I was like, oh, Friday night I'm free. So then So
you're writing back to Massimo, my pajamas party canceled?
Well, after I had said no to him, he was like, well, can we maybe just meet for coffee? And I was like, no. Who are you? I'm not going to meet you for coffee. How random is that? And then I wrote him back 2 days before the event, and I'm like, oh, I just happen to be free. Maybe you could squeeze me in. And he was like, well, we are fully booked. I was like, good for you. Wow, nice job. And he was like, but we can make a table for you. We'll find a way so that you can come to this dinner. I was like, great. So me and my husband show up. And it's in this beautiful mall, this beautiful Italian restaurant. And it's very small. There aren't that many tables. And they gave us this huge table for 6 people for the 2 of us. I was like, I thought they didn't have any tables left. And we had this amazing dinner. And I was like, this guy's really good.
This guy should be the guy.
He's really impressive. Wow, I'm glad that we came to this dinner. And then he gave us his cookbook, which had just come out, Never Trust a Skinny Italian Chef. And he gave me this incredible balsamic vinegar and this Parmigiano Reggiano from his hometown. And I was like, wow, you are really legit, nice work. And then I took a picture with him.
You're really trying.
The cookbook, yeah. And
But at this point, you still didn't know?
At this point, I still did not know. I was like, he's a really amazing chef. I'm glad I came to this dinner, but I still didn't know kind of what league he was in. And I knew his name, but I didn't know who he was. And at the end of the dinner, I was super impressed. He had this lamb dish, which is this incredible rainbow of colors. And I was like, this is beautiful plating. And he served the, I dropped the lemon tart. And I was like, that's really creative. He told us the whole story. And then I go home and I post on my social media, I went to this dinner with this chef, Massimo, and this is a picture of us together, and I was really impressed, and my friends were like, oh my God, Massimo is in Shanghai? And I was like, yeah, maybe I should Google him. And that was how I found out, was basically after posting it. So This was just one example of many of the kind of reach and influence that I was so privileged to enjoy since I became an Academy chair, and it opened so many doors. I was invited to UNESCO conferences. I was invited to do public speaking. I got to speak out about the things I care about, sustainability, later life coaching. So that was a little anecdote. Now back to how the voting works. The way that the Academy and the World's 50 Best operates, some people still think it's a mystery, but actually it's totally transparent and it's all on the website, which is that the world is divided up into, I think it's 26 regions, and each region has an Academy chair. So I represent China and Korea, and there's someone else who represents France, Italy, there's like a section of the U.S. There's three Academy chairs in the U.S. So basically the whole world is divided into these regions. And then each of the Academy chairs is tasked with compiling a list of voters in our region. And those anonymous voters who sign a kind of code of honor contract saying they will not reveal their identities.
Like a light NDA.
Yeah, exactly. Like just an NDA that, we don't enforce unless we find out you've broken it, that they will not reveal their identities. And our job is, we are chosen because we've been in the industry and we are respected as people who probably know our community well. And we are going to be good ambassadors for the brand, but also that we will be able to choose a really expert panel every year. And so that's what we do. So every year I choose a panel. I have to turn over about 30% of people, which is...
How many people in your panel?
So in the world's panels, we have about 40-something people. So that's like times 26. And then in Asia's 50 Best, because it's a smaller area, I have about 50-something people.
Mm-hmm. But these two operate completely separate?
Completely separately, yes.
You do not... intermix.
There's no, we vote totally separately. So the restaurants and even the people on these panels, there could be some overlap with the people, but not necessarily.
It's allowed to be on both panels.
It's allowed to have some overlap because when you find a real expert voter, then you might invite them to be on both panels.
It makes sense, yeah. And are you also, as an Academy chair, are you also a voter?
Yes. So this is a somewhat controversial policy, but the truth is, in the end, we have over 1,000 voters and we only have 20-something chairs. And so some people are like, oh, you can game the system by inviting all the Academy chairs to your restaurant and somehow get more votes, be guaranteed their votes.
But it's just a little percent.
First of all, our votes will be diluted. Even if you got 20 votes from us, you happen to manage to invite all of us to your restaurant and we all want to go and we all have time. First of all, they'd be diluted. But second of all, I think the hardest votes to win are the Academy chairs because all of my colleagues, they travel globally. They are very hard to impress. Unless your restaurant is truly at that level, they're not going to vote for you. So you can invite them to come to wherever you are and try to impress them. But they've already been to 100 mind-blowing restaurants this year. So actually they're some of the hardest people to win over.
Yeah, it would make sense to go the other way around.
It would make sense. Yeah, we can talk more about, people often ask me like, what is my advice, if you want to get on the list? And, we can talk more about that. But definitely my advice is not, definitely you're not going to just win all the Academy chairs by inviting them to your restaurant.
To your restaurant, for sure, yeah. And so this is held once a year?
So we do, once a year, each list has one annual release of the list. Last year was an exception. We skipped a formal ceremony for all of our lists, I think, during the pandemic year. But now we're back.
Oh, okay, perfect. So everything is
back,
back to normal.
Yeah, well, I can't say normal, but we did hold our first real event in person in Antwerp 2 weeks ago. So that's why I was in Europe.
That's why it's starting. Okay, so and the voter is given the right to assess You told me that it's not. I wanted to compare it to the Michelin inspectors. It's not. It's completely the opposite. Actually, when you're a Michelin inspector, you then get all you get. You probably get the budget. You're paid and so on and so on. But you get the time to investigate the restaurants in the future. From the moment that you understand that you are from now on you are, you're a Michelin inspector, and here it's completely the other way around.
Yeah, what I think is very exciting about World's 50 Best is that we don't have any criteria. So we, as the chair people, we choose people who we think understand and appreciate food. And once we find this person, we say, we trust you. You are just going to choose the 10 best experiences you've had in the last 18 months. If it happens to be a burger chain, that's what it is. But we trust that they're going to choose something that really gave them the deepest impression, and it could be because they were super inspired by the artistry of the chef, or by the amazing service, or by their fermentation kitchen. It could be anything. We just trust that they're going to choose something, and that's why I think we have some kind of fresh and surprising restaurants on the list that may never be Michelin material.
Okay, so this is, and there was some. I was just reading about it, that there was a decision that all the first places like Noma, and they were to be excluded from the next elections. What is the name of their
best of the best?
Yeah, their super league, like creme de la creme. And from now, is there an idea that they will also compete within the best of the best, or no?
God. That would be like Game of Thrones style. Yeah. Like you keep going up every level, and finally it's like a dragon.
No, they are just best of the best, like so Hall of Fame thing.
They have been retired to the Hall of Fame, which is a way to keep the list fresh, but it also has other benefits. So the best of the best, all the number ones actually support this idea as well. Because once you've been number one, just like once you've won a gold medal, eventually you're going to have to move down the list. There will be fresher, younger, trendier.
There's no other place to go. Exactly.
And so that means, once you've been number one, eventually you'll be number 2, number 15, and maybe drop out. Does that mean your restaurant is not as good anymore? Absolutely not. Number 50 and number 1 could be, exactly the same elevated experience. It's really doesn't say anything about the lower quality. It just says how many votes that you got. And so I think if I was number 1, I'd be like happy to retire right then, because I don't want to move down the list and have people mistakenly believe like, oh, it's not as good anymore.
Because I'm sure it would happen.
So previously that would happen. Like a restaurant would be number 1, and then be number 2, and then it'd be number 5. But
and people could talk, they'd
be like, oh, it's not as good anymore. Right? Yeah. So I think go out at the top is very good, and also those chefs are still invited to be at our events to give talks, and they are really celebrated, and they get lots of media attention, and they still come to the award ceremonies, and they're really honored.
So it's the best of the both worlds, both for the list and the chef.
Exactly, I think so.
It makes sense. And it was the controversy about the Noma this year being... It
is controversial, and I totally understand people having an opinion about it. And it was, I can't say what they were talking about within the London office, but I know that the time when they decided to eliminate the number ones was right around the time when Noma was moving. And it was kind of like, oh, we're not sure exactly how this is going to work. And they moved and they have a new concept. So maybe we still need to keep them in. But then we'll figure out more clearly exactly how much a restaurant would have to change to still...
We'll leave it for the next year.
So they're like, okay, Noma's back in, and
Noma's back in. Give them number 1.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was something that was sort of in this in-between period when they were trying to decide, how much would a restaurant have to change for it to be considered
in your
as a contender on the list. So I say they're kind of the one that got away. But I also have talked to so many people who firmly believe that Noma deserves to be number 1, and having them at number 1 again certainly doesn't make the list look like it's bullshit and this is a crap restaurant that somehow made its way back.
It's not a problematic. Did you get the chance to talk? So this is also part of your job, of your job, of your honorary position, actually.
Yeah.
You go to the restaurants that have already are on the 50 best restaurants list.
Nothing is required of me
Okay.
except that I give my voter panel every year.
Mm-hmm.
However, as I was explaining,
However, you get invited.
I am often invited to events and by tourism boards and by chefs and restaurants and to visit them. And it's an incredible honor, definitely, that I get this kind of access. I get to spend time with chefs in their homes, on their farms. When I visited Renee, as I'm a life coach, and I was talking to him about meditation, so we went to this meditation pod that he's built outside of Noma, and we spoke about how important mindfulness is and how important work-life balance. And so definitely thanks to this role, I have this kind of access and this honor really to get this behind-the-scenes time and this much more intimate experience of restaurants that you could never get just by being wealthy enough to get a reservation at these restaurants.
For sure. Do you know if the whole world is at this moment covered by the regions that are 50 World's Best Chefs organization? Is it?
Oh, there's definitely countries missing, and I think that's one of the big drivers behind creating this brand new list, which is called MENA, Middle East and North Africa. We don't have a lot of coverage in those areas, and I think that the list office has a lot of foresight in trying to cover a region that no one else is covering, and one that also has Dubai and Abu Dhabi and other places which have the kind of money to attract star chefs. I mean, Massimo has a restaurant in Dubai. A lot of top chefs have been invited, and then we do have one restaurant in South Africa that was on the list, but other than that, I don't think we've had any other restaurants in that entire region. Personally, I feel that mainland China needs much more recognition on the list. It's only one restaurant, and it's a French restaurant run by a French chef. So I would love to see more recognition of that. But there are many regions around the world which haven't typically been seen as gourmet destinations, which definitely have less restaurants on the list.
But this is also important, what you mentioned, the separation into the regions, because many of the competitions, I was talking about it with Igor Lukovic, who we met, because he is a judge at the Decanter wine competition in London. And he said that they are bringing more people from the local communities for the judges, because they realize that people who know the local sorts and so on, they can contribute more because they understand it in depth, comparing to some people who are not living there. So I think this also applies here, because if you have coverage of the region and you have the voters in this region, for sure that there will be more, finding of the more recognition of the good places in this region as well. So it makes sense to be regionalized, if that's the word. So tell me, this is something that so you started as a journalist, and you were journalist for like 20 years. 15, 20 years?
Yeah, I started as a news journalist in 2002. I was the China correspondent for Time Warner, and I was writing cover stories about China. I was writing about everything from contemporary art to Yao Ming going to the NBA, to the development of mobile phone technology, and to Taiwan political issues, to the Olympics going to Beijing. So I was really covering everything about China, and it was at a time when the sleeping dragon was awakening. There was a lot of hunger for news about what's happening in this mysterious country. Up until then, people had a lot of understanding. In the U.S., people understood a lot about Japan. There was a lot of, we had Japanese cars and appliances and anime, but China was still a mystery. So that's how I started as a news journalist. Based in China.
And then you moved basically to travel?
Well,
travel and food,
it's interesting, this story, how I serendipitously moved to writing about food and travel, is I was interested in art and culture. My mother is an artist and also an amazing cook. And after I resigned from being full-time, actually the magazine, it was a Time Warner magazine that got shut down, and then I became a freelancer. And fortunately, I had contacts with Time Warner and with Condé Nast publishers in the US, and I was one of the few American native English speakers who was based in China. I had randomly decided to go there my senior year of college, and I learned to speak Chinese, and that's why I was so lucky to be chosen as China correspondent, even though I was a fresh graduate, and I learned everything trial by fire, just running around like a headless chicken, and I happened to speak some Chinese. And like I said, at that time, everyone was studying Japanese, and so I was just lucky to be there. And so once I started writing more about culture and arts as a freelancer, I was asked to write for Condé Nast Traveler and Food and Wine, Bon Appetit, New York Times Tea Style magazine. And when you write about travel, you always have to write about food.
It makes sense. Yeah,
and it was at that time that I realized that I had learned so much about food from my mother, because when I was growing up, we were very poor. But my mother really wanted us to eat healthy food. And the way that she did that was by having a big organic garden and making everything from scratch. So she was doing sourdough breads when nobody had even heard of sourdough in America. She was doing fermenting, pickling. She was making her own tofu. And she was buying the cheap cuts of meat and cooking them, for a long time and bringing so much flavor that way. And it was all these things that I grew up, this kind of nose to tail, farm to fork, garden to table ways of cooking, these old food ways that I had just through osmosis learned about and done together with my mom. I could identify all the herbs and all the vegetables I'd been weeding out there as a kid in the garden, sweating away, being like, why can't I just have sugary cereal? But once I was asked to write about food, I realized I had this innate knowledge from my mom, and I was so grateful to her. And also when I spoke to chefs, it was like, even though I didn't have any culinary background and I was definitely not a professional chef, we had this language where they would be like, oh, we ferment this, or we're making a sourdough, or we're using these unusual cuts because they're more nutritious, and they're also using the whole animal and honoring that. And I was totally able to speak with them in this language. And I was suddenly so grateful to my mom for all of that work she'd put in when I had been like craving TV dinners. And so it was through that I began writing more about food, and I felt comfortable even though I hadn't had that kind of educational background. And that's when I was asked to write more and more about food. I wrote a food column. Then I was asked to be a founding editor for a magazine called Time Out. And that's a magazine that was founded in London, and it's in New York. It's like a 27-year-old magazine, and we started the first issue in Shanghai. And I was one of the founding editors, and I wrote about food. So for 5 years, I was running around the city, and that was exactly at the time when the restaurant industry in Shanghai was booming. So we went, like I said, around 2002, there were, 10, 20,000 restaurants in Shanghai. And then by the time I was editing this magazine, we were at like 180,000 restaurants. And so it was just this incredible boom. There was so much money pouring into Shanghai. It was an economic boom, and it was also gourmet food was really having a renaissance there. Michelin would come in later, but Michelin chefs from abroad were coming there because there was
the place to be,
and it was a place to be. Jean-Georges von Gerstein came and opened on the Bund in Shanghai. I got to meet him and spend time with him, learn a lot about food from him. And so it was just a super exciting time. I got my education in the right place.
Perfect. And I'm thinking as you're talking that all the things that your mother did, they're coming back, during the last 10, 50 years as like these really modern, trendy and hipster stuff, in culinary terms. So everything that was, even Noma, a few years ago with the fermentation of everything.
You're exactly right. And it was like so serendipitous because it happened to be that the way I ate growing up from birth is now like the trendiest way of cooking, like primal eating, back to the origins, you know, our great grandparents' way of cooking.
It's going back.
So it was really became such a valuable set of experiences that I'd had with food as a kid.
Sustainability, but not because, you know, you were poor, but because now it's trendy, you know. And eating from, you know, nose to tail, it was the only way of eating for many nations worldwide at some point, because like for the Italians as well, you know, cucina povera and so on.
Yes.
They're poor man's cooking, you know.
Yeah, so, and having the respect for the ingredient.
Exactly.
That, you know, I really feel I feel a lot of gratitude. I was actually a vegetarian from the time I was 10. And that was another thing which had taught me so much about using all of the vegetables. And my mom would be using seaweed to get umami flavors and fermented flavors and something called nutritional yeast and all of these kind of obscure things and spices from all over the world. We use North African spices, we use Indian spices, we use Mexican spices, all to bring flavor to, you know, to plants and vegetables.
And now, when you're mentioning your mother, because you got stranded during the COVID in US, I understand that you're now producing. You have been producing her cooking show.
Yes. So I was stranded in the US because I happened to go on vacation with my daughter for the 2-week period when China decided to close the border, and I was visiting my parents. Much to their chagrin, my 3-day visit became a year and a half. Now it's almost 2 years. So I got stuck at home, like many people, and we were in the house, and we had no school, we had no work. I lost my job, I lost my, you know, family and everything back in Shanghai. I couldn't go home. And I thought, how can I make the most of this? Where are the silver linings? And in my family, everyone recognizes that my mother is the unrecognized genius, and she's an incredible artist. She is a writer, a sculptor, a painter, a poet, a novelist. She's written an amazing memoir. She is the genius in our family. All of us recognize that. We're like, we are but the humble, you know,
servants
of her. But she is not famous. She doesn't know how to market herself, and she was really suffering during the pandemic from not seeing her friends, being stuck in the house, and just feeling really isolated. And she's also a very spiritual person. She was really suffering from seeing the pain and from seeing COVID killing people and from seeing her friends suffer and, you know, relatives of friends who had died. And so she was really, really in a dark place from, you know, witnessing what was happening in the world. So I came up with this idea that we were going to do a show starring my mother. She was like totally dragged into it, kicking and screaming, as was the rest of my family. And I slowly started putting my own money into buying lights and buying a webcam and buying a microphone and, you know, teaching myself how to do everything from scratch. And so we started this live stream starring my mother. It's called Mother Zen Chef. You can find it on Facebook, and we live stream every Monday night from my home kitchen, which is this total maximalist kitchen filled with every possible tool and instrument that you can find in any secondhand store or from her travels. We have every size of cast iron pan. We have every implement you can imagine from every culture. And
we were laughing so hard the other day when you showed us the picture or the video of the kitchen, and with the comment that it's a maximalist. It's not minimalist interior, but maximalist.
Yes.
And it's crazy interesting, you know. But the only thing I was thinking, maybe it's problematic, you know, for the people to focus, you know, because at the restaurant where we were eating, we could not hear her. But probably when you hear her, then it's easier. But
she's an actress, and she totally keeps your attention, and she's constantly telling stories about her landlord when she was 10, stranded in Spain and taking care of 3 younger brothers and learning how to use garlic using sign language from her landlord, or, you know, how she learned about, you know, making sourdough and like burned, like, you know, basically almost burned down the kitchen, you know, making her first loaves, or her love for the garden and how she's so inspired by the growing vegetables. And in the city, we just really need to connect with the earth and the compost and the dirt. Like, she can tell stories like no one else. And that's what I try to capture. And the way that she teaches cooking is not so much on the the recipe, but it's really about having bravery and joy and no boundaries in the kitchen. So not being like, oh, French cuisine doesn't use that spice, or that's not the right technique, but just like going into the market and saying, these look exciting, I'm going to take them home. Opening up your spice cabinet and just smelling everything and trying it out, and not having to go buy a recipe, but just truly finding joy. And she's always saying, like, be brave, be bold in the kitchen.
Exactly. This is my experience as well. You know, that I've been teaching in my cooking school for now 11 years now. And there are so many people that are really, really afraid of cooking. With you know, they're in panic when they're in kitchen and so on. And this is exactly what we are trying to instill in them, this idea that they should be relaxed, that it should be a joyful event. That, you know, mistakes are, you will eat it anyways, you know, it's just food and it's creative process and so on.
I love that.
This is exactly you have now verbalized what I've been thinking for many years. Exactly.
Yeah.
It should be something that frees you, not something that, you know.
Exactly. It's the opposite. It should be spontaneous. It should be improvisational, like jazz music, my mom sometimes says. Like, just get in there and just, like, have fun.
Jazz it up.
Jazz it up and try something. It doesn't matter if you make a mistake. You're going to learn from it. You're going to have fun. Bring your family, bring your friends into the kitchen and just experiment.
Perfect. I'm looking forward to having some time to invest to watch it. I'm sure it will be.
Love to have such an expert viewer like you.
Interesting experience for sure. And so now let's get back to your role as academy chair. I wanted to ask concerning your other part of your business and your life. You are a life coach. And I got I sort of I'm getting a hint that I mean we talked about it, but at some point, so you're getting this great job. It's the most, for a foodie, it's the perfect the most perfect job in the world. You know, you're getting all the invitations, all the, you know, first row seats to the events and so on. Big seat for Massimo Bottura, you know, who you ignored. But at some point, you know, it's getting into it started to change, really, and you started to want something more. How did it change? What was the process of, you know, from maybe enjoying such a, you know, luxurious position to maybe wanting something more? And not being, you know, ungrateful. It's just sort of a development, probably, of a...
It's also really related to the way I grew up, which was a very poor but down-to-earth and very politically aware and progressive and liberal family, where we would go to a March on Washington, anti-racism. We would be donating with no money, but my father would be writing checks. We couldn't pay the electric bill, but my father would be writing like a $5 check to like the grape workers of America because they were being poisoned by pesticides. So really this progressive and liberal activist family, yeah. And where we really care about the 99%. And I was off enjoying, like a hedonist and like a, you know, royal princess, this, you know, very much 1% lifestyle. And so I began to think, like, this has been really amazing and fun and inspiring, but it's not my life purpose to bring attention to these extremely exclusive experiences that 0.0001% of the world can ever have access to. So I was thinking, I probably want to leave this career eventually, and I want to do something which is more meaningful to me. I decided to go back to school to study to be a life coach while I was still food writing and still very much in my role as a food media. I went back to school. I studied to be a life coach. I studied everything from mindfulness and meditation to biohacking and exercise and nutrition, and just really a holistic look with a particular focus later on trauma healing, on healing from childhood trauma, which the more you learn about it, the more you realize everyone carries in them. It's not something that you have to have been beaten or a war refugee. Everyone has trauma, and it's really in recognizing our trauma that we can heal. So I started studying that, and I began working with private clients, and I really had these two separate careers, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to transition and still be able to pay my bills. I was going to not do as much journalism. And as I began talking about these issues at our 50 Best events, I was really surprised to find that some chefs were quite interested. I was talking to Dan Barber at an event, the chef from Blue Hill at Stone Barns. I was talking to him actually about agriculture and seeds, and I'm super geeky and nerdy about sustainability and about GMO and about his seed company, which is trying to do open source seeds. And we were talking about that, and he's such a introvert and he's quite shy. So we were at this event and we were talking about that, and then he kind of went away, and then he came back and he was like, Crystyl, I don't know, maybe you would consider, but would you maybe possibly be willing to come and give a talk at Blue Hill? And I was like, yes, I will come and do anything for you, Dan Barber. And then we talked more, and I was sharing with him and with the director there about my life coaching. And they were like, well, why don't you also do a life coaching workshop with our staff? And I was like, really? So you want me to come and do 2 talks? I'll do one that's about chefs and trends around the world, and then I'll do one that is really about life purpose and leadership and about mindfulness and self-awareness. And that was the first time that I had really combined these 2 worlds. And then I started talking about it with more people. I talked to Mauro Colagreco, and he said, well, why don't you come and do a workshop with my staff about psychology and trauma? And I was like, wow, you want me to do this? That's really surprising. And I went to Mir Zur, and I did a workshop that was totally about healing ourselves and about understanding the trauma we've had as children and about meditation.
Yeah, you were not realizing that, in the kitchen there is a lot of trauma.
I certainly knew there's a lot of trauma, everywhere, but definitely in the kitchen. But I didn't
it's a high stressful.
think that these types of restaurants, or that any restaurant would be willing to invest in this kind of benefits for their employees. And I thought it was more of something that, Google has life coaches for all their top people, but restaurants, they are still quite, top-down, hierarchical, kind of the brigade system, and, that's starting to change now. But I was really heartened by that, and I began to talk more about it and realize that I can have this overlap between these 2 careers, where I do have clients outside of the industry, but I also have some of my private clients who are in the industry. And even though with, for example, one of my private clients, he's a restaurateur, but even though we don't talk directly about restaurants, but because we both have an understanding of how challenging the industry is, exactly what it's like to work with chefs, to work with producers, the thin margins of fine dining, it feels like we have this shared experience. And I think it makes me into a really good fit for people in that industry. And then also I've just been doing workshops with restaurants, particularly with restaurants that are in fine dining that are trying to retain their staff. Right now it's really hard. And to give them these kind of soft benefits. And they're also becoming more aware that they want their staff to be more self-aware, to be more healed, and to bring that positive energy into the dining room when they're serving people. They're happy staff. They're staff who have practiced mindfulness. They're willing to stay there, and they're also bringing that kind of energy into the dining room. And so I've been really thrilled that I've been able to keep both of these careers, and I hope to continue developing them.
Perfect. Can you explain a bit about when you're mentioning mindfulness? And I'm not really sure that I don't know, what is it about?
Yeah. So what does it mean to be mindful?
In practical terms, sort of.
In layman's terms, is the first step is just becoming aware of, are we truly in the present moment? Because most of the time we're either thinking about something in the past or something in the future. And are we truly experiencing everything in this moment. We can feel the ground beneath our feet. We can feel our breath. We are noticing everything around us. Nothing is distracting us. We are in this present moment. And that often just by itself can be a challenge. Now, becoming mindful is becoming aware of, in general, we have a whole stream of thoughts and feelings that are present in our brain. Our brain is very capable of thinking 100 things at the same time. As we become more mindful, we become more aware of those thoughts and all of the emotions attached to them. So in this moment, I might become aware like, oh, I'm a bit nervous right now. I'm on this show. That is maybe attached to things from my childhood when I felt like I was kind of on display or I was asked to do something. Some part of me is doing some people pleasing. I want to make you happy. I'm maybe wondering what they're thinking. Oh, they're looking at their phones. They're maybe not interested in what I'm saying. There is some sense of maybe shame or humiliation around that. At the same time, I'm excited. I want to show off. Some part of me wants to pretend that I'm better than I am. And what is that connected to? Oh, that's connected also to times when I got attention for being a star student or from getting approval from my father. Like, there's so many layers.
So many layers, yeah.
And the more we work with ourselves, the more we become aware in the moment of what are all the emotions and thoughts that I'm holding. And we begin to have more compassion for all of those feelings. Things like, oh, I'm really ashamed of sometimes I lie in order to get more attention, or I'm really greedy, or I want to steal something, and all of those things which I used to think of were bad parts of me. We turn towards those parts and we have compassion. We say, why did you start having that behavior? Oh, I started having this behavior because I remember when I was little, I got scolded and I never got to have those candies, and I always feel like I don't get the things that I want, and I feel scared, like I won't have them. And so it's developed into this behavior where, I crave things. I feel like that's going to make me feel safe, or that's going to make me feel loved. And how do we turn towards that part with compassion and forgive it and give it space and understand all the little children in us who were hurt by all of those experiences, and go and embrace them and forgive them and bring them out of that limiting beliefs that they're not good enough just the way they are, that they need to do something or be a certain way in order to be worthy of love or approval or respect and all those things that human beings need in order to feel healthy and worthy. And so the process of self-awareness first is just understanding what are all the things that we're feeling all the time. Maybe in one moment you're not, but when you go to sleep at night, they're going through your mind. And then tracing them back to what are the experiences that created those behaviors? And it's always with self-compassion and love, and never with blame. Even for the worst thought you have, I want to kill that person, or I want to beat that person, or I want to steal, or I want to lie. We turn towards all of those behaviors with compassion, and we say, why did you feel that way? When's the first time you wanted to do that? Wow, that was because you had a really tough experience that I have so much compassion for. Any 3-year-old, any 5-year-old, any 12-year-old being teased would have that reaction. And how can we heal that and bring you into a sense of self-worth without needing to do anything or be any particular way? You are worthy as a human being of love.
As it is, yes, as you are. Thank you for this explanation. I was just thinking how many times I've heard, being in a moment phrase, and just not going a step more, and it sounds like something you would say, just be in a moment, and just a phrase that doesn't mean anything. And you started with that, and then you took me to all the
layers, yeah.
The layers. So now it's thank you for that. Yeah. It's really amazing. And what kind of reception do you find in terms of kitchen staff when you talk to them about it? Is it something that they enjoy? Is it something that they're not used to? Probably not. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not something that they're used to. But I find there is a spectrum of responses, and usually within an audience there will be a few people who are really moved by it because they are willing to be vulnerable and open up to themselves. And then there's a section of people who are like totally like, that's not my problem. That's like some weird new agey thing. And then there's kind of some people who are curious in the middle, and they're like, oh, maybe I'll try meditation sometime. So I definitely find that, there's this spectrum, but I'm super grateful even when I reach one person when I did my workshop at Mirzor, there were a few people, like there was one guy who was like, oh my God, I've never done a meditation. I was like feeling things in my body that I've never felt before. I was like, yes. That's like awesome. You. That's a victory. And then another person who was like, the things you were talking about from childhood, like they are so tough. I don't know if I can ever be like so loving towards that. And I was like, just the fact that you're thinking about it is huge.
It's huge progress.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And would you have something? I'm gonna make this like tabloid, with this question. But do you have some sort of like 5 quick tips for a rising nervous chef, in the kitchen? Not like that, but is there something that you could share that maybe could be sort of like a small, life hack in terms of the things that you just mentioned, something that you can practice, in this, for sure, a stressful environment, the kitchen is.
Yeah. Well, I think there are chefs who are leading by example, and so we should be looking to them. I mean, Eric Ripert wrote a memoir about how he became a more humane head chef. You can look at videos and books and be inspired by chefs who have transformed their kitchens. So I think one thing is like look for the people who are leading kitchens at the level, at that high level, but doing it with more humanity and with big smiles. I mean,
there is a different way.
There is
not just, there is another way. Yeah.
I mean, some people will say to me like, oh, that's a nice idea, but like you can't actually run a top restaurant like that. Like you have to basically beat it into them. And in response, I say, but there are top restaurants that are run in a more loving and humane way. So it's possible. It's hard, but it's possible. And so I say first, like, look for your role models and go and like read their books and watch their videos. Second is you need to do your self-care, and you need to try to take some time for yourself to spend time with your family, spend time with people who bring you good, positive energy. Hire a team who you love to be with. Don't hire first for somebody's knife skills or what's on somebody's resume. Hire, obviously, because they need to have the right skill set, but after that, because they have positive energy, and that's going to be huge difference. So look for your role models, hire your team based on positive energy and people who have a sense of self-worth and love, and you just feel good when you're with them.
Who you feel good about,
and they're going to treat other people well. I would also say that to the best of your abilities, try to get enough sleep. That is so hard in this industry, but the difference between sanity and insanity can be 2 more hours of sleep. If you can get enough sleep, if you can do a little bit of exercise, take care of yourself, you're going to be so much happier, you're going to be nicer person to be around, and you're going to be able to bring that positive energy in, and that's a big one. Sleep in this industry is we're all addicted to our phones, we're all addicted to Netflix. Like, you need to go home and be super disciplined, turn everything off, go to bed. So sleep would be another one. In terms of just this like mindfulness and self-awareness and stuff that may sound like it's totally out there and like not something you can connect with, I would say if you really don't feel like this is something you innately can do, the easiest way in, I would say, are some of these meditation apps. There's one called Headspace. There's many apps you can do, like a 5-minute guided meditation to just calm yourself down. And they will guide you also about self-awareness. They'll be like, the first step is always bringing your attention to your breath. Bring your attention to your breath. You can do it any time of the day. Say you're standing at the pass, you have 30 seconds. Bring your attention to your breath. Bring your attention to your body. We live so much up here in our brains, and we do not pay attention to what's going on in our bodies. So I would say, hack for becoming more mindful could just be using an app. I would say
a hack.
That is definitely a hack.
That's definitely a hack, yeah.
App, turn it on do a 3 to 5 minute meditation anytime you can in a day.
There are so many, with the new. I'm an Apple user, Apple phone. I think you are as well. So there are so many of the new things that they incorporated in the latest versions of the software that include thinking about the sleep, going back to sleep, half an hour before, setting sort of an alarm for the sleep,
Right.
dimming the screen, so many things.
So hard. I mean, even for me as a life coach, I find it, very, very hard. And, sometimes I fail. And when I fail, then I forgive myself.
That's always a good thing that
so
you learn that, yeah.
The last one, you asked me for 5, is to find either a therapist or coach, or if you don't feel like you want to spend the money or time on that, and that's like the next step, which I would firmly endorse doing that at some point in your life. Find what I call a peer coach. And this is someone that you admire, that you have a great rapport with, and that you can be vulnerable with. And you set up 1 hour every week or 2 weeks, and you guys sit down and you each give each other 30 minutes or an hour to pour it all out. And they can pour it all out to you.
Like with reciprocity.
Yes. So I did this for many years with one of my best friends who's also a coach in Shanghai. We were not feeling like we could afford to have a professional therapist at this time. This was years ago. And we would just set up a meeting every 2 weeks. And we would sit down, we would actually do 2 hours, and the first hour would be my hour, and the second hour would be her hour, and we would basically just what we call hold space for each other, because one of the most healing things that anyone can do for you is to be your empathic witness. And that is to listen with full attention and respect and love. And almost they don't need to have any other skill set other than to listen with an open heart, and you can feel that energy. And each of you gets to share, and you just let it out.
Yeah, I'm sure it helps. Oh, thanks you for this, for the 5 tips. I didn't mean literally 5. No, I didn't mean.
3, 4, 5, yeah.
No, I was just, making a joke. Like a tabloid thing.
I'm a good student.
Yeah, you are a nerd in your core.
Super nerd. Revenge of the nerds.
I just realized when you said 5, so the 5th one.
Yeah.
Is
Okay.
perfect. One more. Thanks for the effort. So. Tell me maybe something that I'd like to know because yesterday we were talking and then you mentioned next week I'm going truffle hunting in Alba and then I'm going to see this chef and and then I'm going to this dinner where this chef will be and these were all the names that get your head now you know them all. I'm sure you're not making any mistakes like with Mr. Bottura at the time.
I think I've gotten most of the very top
of the very top
but
ones.
There are definitely lots of regional chefs that I don't know, but I definitely have learned the top 50 and that, for example, this week I'm going to a dinner that Ferran Adria is cooking with Anna Roche. I have met both of them and I am super, super excited and totally as starstruck as anyone else to be having a dinner cooked by Ferran Adria. So yes, I have these experiences. I was invited truffle hunting. I'm also going to see Lara and Massimo next week at Casa Maria Luigia. And I'll eat with Lara at a new restaurant that they've just opened in the Ferrari Center. I think it's called Cavillo or something. So yes, I have these extreme experiences, which people in the industry understand are, massive, but actually people outside of the industry, they're also just like totally, blank expression. So it's very much something that only people in the industry can be like wowed by.
Can it relate?
I mean, I've definitely kept humble by like a lot of my, people in my friend community who are, I'll be like, oh, I'm going to see, Massimo Bottura next week. And they're like, who? And they're like,
don't worry about it.
Yeah, they're like, Gordon Ramsay? I've heard of him. I'm like, oh, God, seriously, you can name 3 chefs. One of them is Gordon Ramsay.
Did you have, Sonia actually mentioned, but we didn't talk about it, so maybe I should have asked before. Have you met Anthony Bourdain?
Okay, so yeah, I have worked with Anthony Bourdain's production company.
Okay.
And I was invited to try and help with his Shanghai show, but unfortunately I was in the US and so someone else did it. And now I so deeply regret that I didn't stay in Shanghai to do that. I was like, oh, I'll meet him next year. There's always another opportunity. And yeah, very sadly, I did not meet him. I worked with his production company to shoot another show with a food expert in China. And we traveled and we did a show that was about a regional delicacy. but and his production company is amazing. But I didn't get to actually meet him.
That's unfortunate. Yeah. Do you have some something that you would like to share? Some sort of anecdote with maybe some of these chefs that at least the gastronomy lovers and foodies would recognize?
Yeah, well, I can ask you, like, have you been to any of the 50 best restaurants? Which ones have you been to? You haven't been to one? You haven't been to Isafranco?
No.
Oh my goodness.
No, this is the first one on the list.
I mean, well, because I mentioned Isafranco because it's not too far.
Yeah, it's just
it's an amazing experience. I mean, I myself have probably only been to like 25 of the 50 and haven't traveled very much in South America. There's definitely ones that I would love to get to. Let me think. Vladimir Mukin is one of my favorite chefs based in Moscow. I just love his cuisine is so delicious and so creative and beautiful and really celebrates
he also has different restaurants. I know him by White Rabbit, but
yes, he has like 25 restaurants in his group, and he's incredible creative mind. He has so many menus and so many recipes. All right, you're going to have to narrow it down a little bit because I'm like, okay, should it be Asia? Should it be America? Should it be, you're going to have to give me more.
Well, I don't know.
Somebody that you're really curious, or like a region or a cuisine or...
No, I'm just thinking, I know, I was really excited when you mentioned Ferran, and we both, you also haven't been to El Bulli? At the time, yeah?
Because by the time I started writing about food, it was already closed.
It was already closed,
and if I had known about it 10 years earlier, then I definitely would have made a huge effort to go there because he's such a legend. I have met Ferran at several events, although I've spent more time with Albert Adria because he travels a lot. And I've seen him in Istanbul, I've seen him in Moscow, I've seen him around Italy, I think. And he is like... I mean, this is not a big anecdote, but he's like the most casual person you can imagine. He wears a hoodie everywhere. So we're in Istanbul, I think, and we were supposed to go to the Royal Palace to have this like gala event. And we're all like dressed up in our like ball gowns, and he shows up in his hoodie again. I'm like, seriously? You're in a hoodie? We're at the Royal Palace at a gala? And I'm like, that's how you can roll because you are an Adria. You can do whatever you want.
You can do whatever you want.
Nobody blinks an eye.
It's even hipper.
Yeah, exactly.
It just adds to the coolness.
It's like rock and roll.
Yeah, okay, and I wanted to ask you one more thing. Maybe you mentioned earlier that it's the big part of the discussion now becomes what they are doing sort of behind the scenes. Okay, the food is something that's on the stage, but the behind the scenes things that these restaurants and these great chefs do, like all the modern and cool words like sustainability and everything, the effect on the environment and whatever each one of them is doing. But do you think that these food trends, these actually are food trends, and in a good way, in the best possible way, food trends that we hope that they will stick? But do you think that this is becoming more and more important? In terms of recognition, somebody as a top chef.
Yeah.
Is it getting not enough just to have some good food?
Yeah, I think so. I think in order to be one of the greats who is really respected as a legend, someone like Ferran or now Renee or Heston Blumenthal, that it definitely has to be bigger than just your little restaurant. And it's actually connected to what I was talking about earlier with finding life purpose and doing things in alignment with your values. And it's something that I talk about when I give public talks about what makes a restaurant one of the best in the world. And what I talk about is that it is chefs who are using their platform and their fame in order to leverage that in order to have a greater impact on something which affects the 99%. And that we see with Massimo
is
Bottura,
doing
with
it, yeah.
Food for Soul. We see it with Virgilio Martinez, who has this huge project of full-time foragers who go all over Peru, and he's created this immense botanical library which celebrates and brings attention to the indigenous species all over Peru and encourages people to continue eating these foods, not destroying their environments, and having a pride in these indigenous food cultures so that they're not just leveling the country to build malls, but they're saying, you know, we need to preserve these ingredients, which no other country in the world has, creating this beautiful library with all the Latin names and the photography and all of the details about where all of these different species come from spices to the 1,000 kinds of potatoes to all of these, you know, even bacteria that live at different elevations. So each of these chefs who I have really gotten to know, when I spend time with them and learn like what really moves you about this job, then I learn about what their impact is, which is much bigger than the restaurant. And I think that is super important. And it's definitely what makes me remember a chef and an experience more than just the food is delicious. I mean, the food is delicious is kind of like fundamental. Like, obviously, you're a good cook. But what are you doing that is truly inspiring to someone that they would remember a year later? Like, wow, that was so moving. You know, Massimo is like using like 10,000 pounds of tons of waste food and creating these like beautiful restaurants that are really respectful to people, that aren't just like a soup kitchen throwing some calories at you, but creating an experience that someone would pay for and giving it to homeless people who are no less than, you know, or more than any other human being on this earth. And so I definitely think that it's not enough once you have a reputation and celebrity that you have a responsibility. And it's something that in college I was a literature major, and I studied Russian literature, but I also studied African literature. There's a writer, Chinua Achebe, and one of his tenets was the responsibility of the writer. And I feel that there is also the responsibility of the chef, or the responsibility of any renowned person. We have these platforms now. They have millions of followers on Instagram, on their YouTube channels, and that we should be using our influence for positivity. And we find whatever is meaningful to us. You know, maybe our purpose is not to feed the homeless, but it's, you know, to celebrate something else.
It should correlate to us, not to...
We discover it, and part of discovering that is through mindfulness. You know, what is the most deeply meaningful to me? And often it's things from our childhood that we remember. We remember seeing people in need, or we remember seeing people who were, you know, artists, and we want to celebrate that, or whatever it is that we identify and then figure out how to use our resources and our platform to further that vision.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. Is it something that, unfortunately, you have been here for too short of a time, yeah? So I would really like to ask you about what you have seen here, but I know that you just got a glimpse of the local cuisine, and I know that you met Vanya Pushkar, and he's a really good chef.
Yes, he's wonderful.
He's wonderful, and he's somebody that really understands the impact, and I think maybe I'm partial because he's a friend. We're a small community, so we all know each other. But maybe I think that he got into the meaning of what he's doing, maybe the deepest, because he's doing something that nobody else here is doing, which is modern Serbian cuisine, ultra local ingredients, like and so on. And so maybe you just got a glimpse, but maybe that would be something that can be a message to the aspiring chefs even here in Serbia.
I absolutely agree, and I was very impressed by his philosophy of celebrating local and trying to work with producers directly, which I think is really, really important and impactful, that things aren't all going through a middle person, but that you get to know your farmer, you get to know your butcher, and the people who raise your animals. And I also was, so far what I've seen, 2 days, really pleased to see that people are also using local meat and dairy, because I have a controversial opinion on this. Right now it's very controversial, but I really believe that people should eat meat and should eat dairy. And I feel that conventionally raised, because there's this huge vegan movement, and there's this huge kind of plant forward movement globally, which I think is probably going to become popular here as well.
No, I'm just kidding. It's just not huge in Serbia.
Yeah, it will be, because the top chefs in the world are now developing vegan menus. 11 Madison Park went vegan, and I actually talked to Daniel Hume directly about this. I was like, I want you to watch this movie. I want you to look into what is regenerative farming. But when you go, I was also on the plant-based vegetarian side for many, many years. I was vegetarian for 18 years. I thought, this is how we're going to save the planet. We have to stop eating animals. We have to stop cutting down the rainforest to graze cows for McDonald's, which I still firmly believe. But as I began my education, in part by talking to Dan Barber, going to that farm, I visited a farm outside of Copenhagen called Field of Dreams, which used to supply Relay and that whole restaurant group. And when you go and you talk to farmers, which I started doing more of, because I was like, I need to educate myself more. How can we eat vegetables and not meat? And when you talk to farmers, you realize that the biggest mistake we made was separating animals and plants and trying to grow both of them using fossil fuels. And that for billions of years, the way that animals and plants worked was in this perfect ecosystem where animals this symbiotic system where plants will grow in a healthy way and animals will grow in a healthy way if you bring them together. And that regenerative farming has to be the future. And also that conventional farming is just as detrimental to the soil, to the water, to the people who pick those vegetables and fruits. It kills the biodiversity. Any conventional farming is spraying everything with pesticides and killing every animal in sight. There's no rabbits on a conventional farm that's covered in pesticides. There's no foxes. There's no insects. There's no life in the soil. The soil is completely depleted. And people don't realize that a vegetable, the way it's farmed, can be incredibly harmful to our environment. They think that because they're eating a plant that nothing was harmed. But actually, many, many animals and the life of the planet is harmed.
Exactly. If you just look at the bigger picture,
I want to encourage chefs who are influential to talk about regenerative farming and to buy both plants and animals and dairy from farmers who are doing what's called regenerative farming, where you bring animals back into the system. And you do need to be educated about how to do it. You can't just have a tractor and spray everything down and kill everything and then plant GMO seeds every year and just buy them from the factory. You actually have to learn how to farm using an closed loop ecosystem. But it is possible. And we even see in America that some of the huge corporations, because they have depleted the soil so much with their conventional farming, with pesticides, are investing in regenerative farming, not for the good of the planet, but because they can't grow, they can't get the same yields. And so we see one of this huge company called General Mills, which supplies breakfast cereal to the entire United States, just invested $200 million in regenerative farming to bring cows back onto the soil because they are not able to get the same yields, and they see that
out of necessity, which is the way of telling us, you hit the dead end.
Right. So I was happy to see the celebration of this local pig, and I was dining
Mangalica,
Mangalica, and it's not that I don't feel that we should be humane and we should treat animals with absolute respect and we should give them a good life. They should be healthy. I firmly believe that, but I believe that we should live in harmony with the environment and the way that this system, this regenerative system, has developed over literally hundreds of thousands of years is what we need to go back to. And we need to bring both animals and plants back together in a healthy way. We need to educate the consumer who thinks, because of a lot of greenwashing, that buying like Beyond Burger or Impossible Meats is helping the environment, when actually many of those fake meats are incredibly destructive. If you look at the ingredient list, they're not healthy in any way, and they're monoculture farming. They're not healthy, and they're not saving the planet.
Yes, yeah.
And so that is a very effective...
Education is extremely important in this area. Yes,
so
because
that's something I feel strongly about, and I was really happy to talk to the chef last night, that he's like supporting local farmers, and that he has, you know, this beautiful lamb on the table, who, you know, from a local farm, and that there's not, so far I haven't seen this kind of social justice movement around veganism, which I think many, many people are well-intentioned. They think that it's the right thing, and I did also for many, many years. But really, when you get out there and you work with the farmers, you talk to the farmers, you know that they need the animals on their soil. And maybe we'll eat less meat, but we'll eat healthy meat. There's a little story I learned from a farmer in China when I made a panel that was about trying to use local products in China, and trying to think about the most luxurious ingredient you can have is actually the one that's the closest, not the furthest away, because for many years the luxury industry has been about, this is caviar from 10,000 miles away, and this is this chicken from France, then we're having it here in California. But actually what luxury is now is really having something from 5 miles away, knowing your farmer, supporting your local community. And so I was doing a panel about that, and I invited a farmer to talk about his experience, and he said he was trying to convince a farmer in his area to go organic. And he was like, so what do you need to go organic, you know, to stop using pesticides? And this farmer was like, there's no way I can do that. It's like super expensive. You're going to like lose so much yield. You know, it's just like not economically viable for me. And he's like, okay, so tell me, you know, how much money would you need? And he's like, oh, I don't need money. He's like, well, what do you need? He's like, oh, I need 5 cows. I need 20 ducks. I need some chickens, and I need some goats. And he's like, oh, so you need animals? He's like, yeah, if I have these animals, then no problem. I can go organic, but I can't afford those animals. So, you know, I have to go conventional. And I was like, wow, okay, this is somebody who crunch the numbers and is saying this is what he needs. He needs animals on his farm. Like, who am I to sit in America and be like, I'm going to be vegan and save the planet, and like, you know, never worked a day on a farm. You know, I am not somebody, you know, this is like such an elitist attitude to be like, everybody should eat vegan. And so that is, you know, something that I think I would encourage everyone to do. Go out and talk to your local farmer.
Mm. Thank you so much for this day. It was so much. It was such a pleasure to meet you. I was really happy to spend the day yesterday with you, and
yes.
we had so much fun. Thank you for this interview and the chance to talk. And I'm sure that the listeners will be happy to hear something new and meaningful in terms of gastronomy, you know, on the highest level. So I'm really pleased that we did this.
Yes,
thank you
my
so
pleasure.
much.
Thank you.